Hello and welcome to Tonight at 8 from the RSGB. Whether you're new to the hobby or have been doing it a lifetime, there are so many different facets to explore and new innovations to discover that there's always something new to try. Our guest tonight has been licensed since he was 15 and is active in many radio clubs and organisations, plus has had a long career in technology, including as a futurologist for BT and now working for UK Research and Innovation, helping companies collaborate and grow. So a very warm welcome to Jonathan, G0DVJ. Hello, Jonathan. Can we hear you? Jonathan?
I hope so.
Oh, yes, we can hear you. Sorry. Just for a moment there. I was a little bit worried.
Okay.
Just give us a flavour of what we're going to hear about tonight.
Yeah, well, I'm really pleased to be here and thanks for the opportunity to present at one of these sessions. Firstly, if you're in the target audience for this one, congratulations on getting your license. And for the others, well, welcome back. And I think however long you've been in the hobby, there's hopefully something in here for you tonight. I'm going to look at the various things that might help you get started, that might help you plan how you're going to go through the hobby and eventually meet other challenges that you might come across. So we're going to have a good look at the hobby tonight.
Well, sounds wonderful. We're looking forward to it, Jonathan. Before we join you for your presentation, a reminder that if you're watching this on Monday the 7th of December, then this is live and you can ask questions and add comments on either BATC or YouTube at any time during the presentation or straight afterwards. Please include your first name and call sign if you have one within the message. And also please note that if you can make this video stream, fill your screen on most devices, usually by double clicking on the picture or pressing the full screen button. But now it's time for the presentation, so back to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, David. And so what's the purpose of this session? I just want to tell you a bit about that first. I want to inspire you, first of all. I want to inspire you to get active in the hobby, to try lots of different things, and to identify challenges for what you can achieve in the hobby. Secondly, I want to help you plan and prepare so that you feel more confident to get on air. Thirdly, I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you to think big picture about all the things that you could try out and progression, not just in terms of license levels, but in terms of the activities that you do in amateur radio. So this is a journey, not a simple arrival. I want you to think about the ways that you might find challenge in radio. Let me tell you why I do this. I've been able to talk to people since I was a toddler, and global communication is really simple these days on the internet. So I do this because I can set my own challenges and have a lot of fun achieving them. So it's all about the challenge for me. Fourth thing I want to do is impart some information. I've tried many aspects of this hobby, as David said. However, I'm just one person, so I won't cover everything and I won't expect you to like the things that I like, but I'm going to tell you about a lot of different things, and I hope you'll find your passion within those. So parts of this will be a personal story about, an example of how I've progressed through it, what I've found out about, and hopefully that method will inspire you as well. And the last thing, I just want to illustrate how much fun you can have with this hobby, because whether you're new to it or returning from a break, there's so much that you can do in it, and I think it's really important to explore. So let's get started. And by way of starting, I'm going to start with an introduction. So I started as a 13-year-old, as David said, teenager, in 1979. Some of you can do the math. And that's when I got my first receiver. And I started listening to amateurs on 2 meters FM and 80 meters single sideband. And I discovered the RSGB. They gave me a shortwave listener number, RS42461. I still remember it today. And I guess it's like if you're in the forces, you remember your number there as well. So here are in black, here are my call signs that I've had since then. So these are my personal call signs, along with that shortwave listener number. And back in the day, with the support of others in my hometown of Harwich in Essex, I helped to reform a radio club that had been dormant for many years. But only really later did I work out and realize what the full value of being in a club was all about. Because you can learn so much on your own, but by seeing what other people do, you learn so much more. So just to illustrate that, here are all the call signs that I've used by being members of clubs and groups. So there's a few contest groups, there's a few clubs there, and I've been very pleased to be a member of all of these. And it's expanded the number of activities that I've been able to try out and decide which ones I like very, very quickly. And I think it's really important at the moment, now especially, when you can do all the training and the learning online and even the exam online with online invigilation, which I think is a terrific thing. I think it's got people through this lockdown and introduced so many people to the hobby. But if you've come through that route, you maybe haven't come into contact like you would have done perhaps with a club, with a local club, because they would normally perhaps have done the training, offered training courses, and certainly hosted the exams. So this is a loss to clubs, but it's also a loss to individuals, I think, if you come in that way, because the club offers so much. And you can see that through the number of different activities through those blue call signs. And I was happy to go overseas as well and use some other club call signs. There's some other clubs and contest groups that I've used when I've been outside the UK. And as you progress through the license levels, that's something else to get involved with. And finally, in brown here, you can see the small selection of special call signs that I've used. Firstly, GB2RS, the news service of the RSGB. I'm a volunteer to read the news. If you haven't listened to the news broadcasts at all, then I'd recommend that, either locally on FM or on the national broadcasts. So I'd really recommend that you dip into that. But you see the other special event call signs there, and the ones with extra numbers rather than just one number in the call sign, they tend to be for the bigger events. They tend to be for the national commemorations of things. So there you've got 400 years since the Pilgrim Fathers reached America in GB 400 AA. You've got New Zealand being represented by our club activities in the World Cup cricket last year, and the 75th anniversary of VE and VJ Day earlier this year with GB 75 Peace. So very happy to work those, but also the local special event club call signs as well. So we've got things like lighthouse stations there, and GB2CDS is Colchester District Scouts. So getting involved with those activities, I think, it does expand what you can do with the hobby. So I hope I've conveyed the value of joining in with others in amateur radio, and so the value of joining a club. Now, since I started in 1979, I've seen a lot of changes to the hobby. And so this little section is about if you're returning after a break. But, and it's very common actually, I think. I've over my time in the hobby, although mine's been pretty continuous, I've had a number of friends who dipped out of it for a while and then came back, and they said, wow, it's changed since I've been away. And so I just thought I'd focus on some of those changes for one part of this, and reflect on what you might not have seen the last time you were active. So if you were coming back to this, and if that's not you, there's still things here you can find out about. So if you're returning after a break, you may not have had digital. That might have started since. So you may not have had digital voice. You may not have had digital error correcting slow scan TV. And you may not have had some of the digital data modes. And the reason I made that one bigger on the slide is because this has probably had more impact in recent times than any of the others. You now have digital data modes that can hear and work stations that are well below the noise level that you can hear as a human being. And that really does open up that aspect of the hobby to an awful lot of people. Also, if you're returning after a break, you might not have been able to see signals as well as hear them. Nowadays, we have spectrum scopes or waterfall displays in software and on radios, and not only data signals, but all signals. So voice signals, CW, data, you can see them all. And unfortunately, you may not have had in the old days quite as many problems as noise and interference does these days. Now, on this one, you can see another another spectrum scope, and those vertical lines regularly repeating, and if you look at the scale, it's pretty often along there on 40 meters. That really does show the effect of some of the interference we get from VDSL broadband across 40 meters. So if you're returning from a break, you might not have had that problem before. Also, if you're returning after a break, you might not have had the chance to get a report from somebody without actually having a contact. So these days, either on data using WSPR, a Whisper, or on CW with the reverse beacon network, you can get an accurate report measured in all parts of the globe as to where your signal's being heard. And you don't even have to have a contact. So that may have changed. Also, if you're returning after a break, you might not have, and you did satellite work before, you might not have been able to do that without software that shows you where the satellite is when it's over the horizon. Well, now we have geostationary satellite with Oscar 100. And that really is a difference in terms of satellite working. You used to have to work out when the thing's over the horizon, when you can actually send signals to and from it. While I'm looking at this, this web page that's shown on this slide is actually able to control a radio receiver, a software-defined radio receiver, an SDR, through the web. So now you don't even need to have the receiving equipment at home to be able to listen to the satellite, or any other part of the bands for that matter. There are web SDRs available where you can tune in and listen before you've even got a receiver. So that probably is a difference from when you were last in amateur radio. The amount of software-defined radios now around, and the amount of SDR technology that's inside most modern radios. If you're returning from a break, you may not have had up-to-date information about propagation before. Now, these days, there's so much available. It's really great. Spaceweather.com is one. You'll see this panel on the right there with all the information in one place about the conditions that affect propagation and the likelihood of making contacts. And I want to point out and shout out about PropQuest, which is the other one I'm showing here. Brilliant site, coined by Jim Bacon, G3YLA. Some of you will know. And you can look at NVIS propagation for straight up and down signals. You can look at sporadic E propagation on there. And it's a fantastic site. So look up PropQuest if you haven't seen that one before. But probably if you're returning after a fairly long break, you might have had to rely on propagation predictions that are printed in a monthly magazine that in turn were worked out a month before that. So rather than having 2 months out of date predictions nowadays, you can have actual data being displayed in real time. And if you're returning after a break, you may not have been able to do major contests or field days without loads of people being needed, because you need somebody to do the logging, somebody to do the operating, somebody to do the check logging, which multipliers you'd got or which people you'd worked before. Nowadays, great software takes the place of that. And no longer do you need to wait and do hours of work trying to get your entry file ready and nicely written out neatly and posted off. Of course, that's all online as well. So contest logging software and online submissions really make contests great fun without any admin to do at all. And nowadays, the software sort of allows you and facilitates you to use 2 radios at once if you're doing the top level of contesting. And a lot of the top radios actually have 2 independent receivers in them nowadays. It wasn't that long ago when you needed 2 separate radios to do that. And finally, if you're returning after a break, you may not have had to consider so carefully where the person is that you're contacting. Because nowadays, people do remote operation. So they may not actually be where the call sign suggests they are. And remote operation is becoming more and more popular, more and more common. And it's solving a lot of problems for some people and opening up possibilities for others. So you probably never had to worry about where somebody was apart from their call sign before. So that's now changing. So many exciting changes to the hobby. But regardless of whether you're completely new to this hobby or whether you're returning after a break, it's okay to be starting out. It's okay to be coming back to the hobby. Although on the face of it, it probably, contacting people on air probably seems a little bit exposed if you're new to this hobby. But actually, that's the great thing about it, that other people are listening in. Because people will generally understand that you're new and they'll love to help. So if you're talking about something you might be interested in, they'll really be keen to join in and help you work out how to do that. And I often compare our hobby to fishing. So kind of electromagnetic fishing, really. And if you're starting out with fishing, you could be using the wrong bait or fishing from the wrong place or the wrong technique with casting the line for a very long time until you ask somebody how to do it. So don't be worried about getting on air to start with. We all did it once, and I've found that others are overwhelmingly keen to assist people who are new to the hobby. So the main thing is to get on the air. And I emphasize the value of on-air club nets, because there you can ask about things. There's usually somebody reasonably local, and they know the answer, or they know somebody who does. And that might be where to get something, or how to do something, or what the best approach is to doing something. So really a valuable resource. And if you're missing out on that, I think you're missing out big time. So you don't have to be left wondering what the questions are. Never mind the answers, okay? It's okay to discover what you don't know. And the foundation level is exactly that. All right, the foundation is to get you started. There's so much more to learn and do. And that's true than the foundation can possibly tell you. And there are a number of practical things to know about. And I'm going to cover some of those in a moment. But just one example for now, the phonetic alphabet. So it's in the foundation book, the phonetic alphabet. You probably look at it and think, yeah, I know that, and you can recite it. But why, when, how? Why would you use it? And to be the most natural operator, contrast on VHF locally with your club net. You don't need to use phonetics. People know you already. They know what your call sign is. Perhaps the first time when you go on air, you might need to give it so that people write it down properly. But you don't need it after that. And probably locally with great signals and people whose native language is the same as yours, you probably don't, unless you've got a very unusual name, you don't need to spell your name out. But on HF, it's very different. So almost every contact you make randomly on HF is with somebody who doesn't know you, maybe somebody who doesn't know the geography of the UK, and for whom English isn't the first language. So, phonetics then come into their own to spell your call sign out, to spell your name out, to spell your QTH, your location out, your town or city. And I think that's it's just a nice example of how the information is there at foundation course level, but until you start using it, you don't work out what's comfortable to use. And just to use it all the time for your call sign is just not necessary. So something like that, simple but important. But everyone is different, and everybody's situation is different when you join this hobby. People bring different resources to the hobby. They have different amounts of time, different backgrounds, different skill sets. And so some are quite technical, but some are not. Some are actually good communicators, and believe it or not, some aren't. And that's the thing that they challenge, that they learn. So it all depends where you're coming from. And that, together with your aspirations, is what determines what the challenge of radio is for you. Now, I'm going to use my personal experience again here. So when I started, I was just a teenager. So I had to invest my pocket money very wisely indeed, what little I had. And my start out was like this. So my first 2-meter antenna was a vertical whip on a biscuit tin lid, turned upside down. And that was my ground plane. And I had one, I saved up like mad, and with the help of Christmas and birthdays, I think, which come close together for me, I was able to get a radio which had one band only, just 2 meters, that LED display, so it looks rather antiquated now. And but it was multi-mode, only 10 watts, but it was multi-mode. So that meant on 2 meters, I could explore FM, I could explore the single sideband. There was even a CW button, which I had no idea about at the time. And my shack was just the corner of the bedroom. All right, I didn't have a special place for radio, as it were. Wasn't ideal, but it got me going. And I realized quite quickly that you could do an awful lot from that, and actually you could learn an awful lot from doing it that way. But I didn't realize then how much I could learn. So let's talk about learning and trying stuff. So I was lucky. I went away to university, and I had the chance to meet other amateurs who weren't local to me at all, where I'd come from. So I saw lots of different shacks. I saw lots of different equipment that people used. Now, you might not be going to university, but you'll still meet local amateurs that you'll meet on air. And outside of COVID restrictions, a lot of those will be very willing to show you what they do, how they do it, and what they do it with. And I think that's very, 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 very valuable. It's so much better to see something than to read about it, either on the web or in books. And also at club events, again, I come back to this club thing. When a club puts on an event, a special event station or a contest or something else out in the field, going along to that and seeing what people are actually doing is so much better than reading about it. So hands-on. While I was away at the university, I discovered my passion for Morse code because I saw other people using it. I realized that Morse gets through when lots of voice signals won't. And the thought of adding this skill to that I could read it in my head seemed like magic. But it was immensely satisfying when I did it. And although CW might seem a difficult step now at the moment, when you've got the time later on, when you've got the time to learn something else and the motivation and the dedication to do it, it's a great one to come back to. I saw people operating outside the UK where they went on holiday and things. So I got a sort of idea for that later in my amateur radio hobby. And outside of pandemics, of course, people travel a lot more now. So that's another thing. So when I first met my wife, she's from Poland originally. I'm now 26 years married. And it's another aspect of the hobby. I took out a Polish license. We've got a flat there on a very tall building. And there's a tri-bander on top of that building. I found another radio amateur, coincidentally, in the same block. And he had a nice big antenna on top of the tower block already. And being of the amateur radio spirit, he just hoisted his coax feeder up from his flat down below, up to our window, and said, "Here, use that for the week while you're here." So yeah, it's just another example of how great people can be in the hobby, helping out. And since then, I've been out with Polish clubs at the Baltic coast or up mountains, doing VHF field day from the top of a mountain is quite, in Eastern Europe, is quite different from doing it on a field near Colchester. So trying these things for real is so much better than imagining it. So I, again, just do whatever you can, whatever you come across, have a go, because you don't know what your passion's going to be until you find it. And I saw other radios and antennas used by people as well. And that's really important because it's very hard when you're in a store, in a radio shop, if you like, with money in your pocket that you've worked hard for, to think, what radio really should I buy? It's not immediately obvious. So trying these things out in a nice relaxed environment with with somebody who's been using it for ages, with a cup of coffee and talking to them about it, is much, much better. I'd recommend that over reading the spec list by a long mile. And also I became, while I was away at university, I became interested in the competitive aspect of radio, so contests. And I saw that as a way to improve my knowledge, to improve the operating techniques I could use, and to improve the station and the shack equipment, and to learn about more equipment for the shack. So of course, after I'd finished university, I could get a proper job, and earn some money and start buying different radios. I'll say something about that in a minute. But the Shack in the Box sort of generalist radio can be a very good way to start out, because it gives you access to so many things with one piece of kit. It won't be the top performer in anything, but it will give you the chance to try lots of different things out. And so many radios fall into that category these days. So I tried most things. I tried VHF, UHF, HF, very low frequencies. I tried SSB, FM, CW, data modes of various sorts. I tried satellites, contests, special event stations, portable operation, TV, mainly slow scan. I tried direction finding competitions. I tried microwave bands. I tried operating abroad. I tried DXing for the longest distance. I tried QSLing to confirm those contacts. I tried awards, collecting awards for what I've achieved. I tried low power, so-called QRP operation. I tried building stuff. I'm not very good at building stuff, I have to say, but antennas and building software, particularly because of my background. I did regular rag chews and nets, and I still do. Special event stations, teaching and examining Morse code. I was a volunteer examiner for Morse code after I'd become proficient at it. Club lectures, training provision, and remote operation and more. So that's 28, I think, things I've mentioned, aspects of the hobby. So there's a fair few to try. And I still haven't covered all the rest that you could do. So here's a few ideas of some of the things to find out about when you're starting out. So what practical things can we talk about? Well, location information to have at hand. When you first start, you don't know what people are going to ask you for on the radio. Now, some people might ask you for your locator square. So it's great to have that ready and written on a post-it in front of you before that happens. And if you do some contests on VHF in particular, that's one of the things that you often exchange with somebody, so they can measure the distance between you and get the points. So that will be of the form something like IO91QS, or a 6-character locator is usually enough. For some contests and on some maps you'll see in amateur radio, you'll see zones marked out. There are two sorts of zones, CQ zones and ITU zones. ITU being the International Telecommunications Union. So for the UK, if you're in the UK, you're likely to be in zone 14 for CQ and ITU zone 27. And these bits of information are also useful if you're going to do any QSL cards, whether electronic or printed ones, because you really want to have this information for all contacts printed on the cards, or designed on the cards if it's electronic, digital. Your islands on the air reference for mainland GB is EU for Europe 005. So have that written down as well. And some people will ask you for your Worked All Britain square. Now, your Worked All Britain square is related to the national grid reference. So round here, for example, near here could be TM23. Now, you can have a grid national grid reference that goes into far more precision than that. But for the WAB Worked All Britain Awards, that's usually the precision you need, just 4 characters. And if you're doing some contests and you're asked for your district code, it's quite often in the UK that's going to mean the first 2 letters of your postcode. So for me, it would be IP for Ipswich. So having that sort of information to hand and understanding what it means can be a useful practical thing. The other thing when you start out is when you're listening to somebody and thinking, oh, should I give them a call? Judging the sort of QSO that's possible, because QSOs, contacts, come in different types. So if you listen to somebody and they're probably a DX or rare station, they may just be giving a quick call and report, exchanging call signs and giving a 5-9 report, for example. That's just to say that you've managed to get your signal to them and their signal to you. And they're only doing that because they've got a whole pile up of other people waiting to work this rare place, or this person who doesn't come on the radio and activate that location very often. And so you should fall in with that, right? And listen to what's going on and mimic it. So if they're giving call and report to somebody, don't start having a long chat. Just give a call and report, and that's done. For others, it might be fairly rubber stamp. If you're listening to somebody who's operating in English, but actually English isn't their first language, they may be very limited in what they can talk about in a contact. So we call it a rubber stamp contact, or QSO, where it's basically just the basic details of your name, the signal report, your location, not too precisely. Usually, especially if you're working globally, if you're working around Europe or outside Europe, the nearest big town or city is perfectly adequate. And then maybe your equipment, what the weather's like, and that's essentially all a rubber stamp contact would be. So again, if you're a bit nervous first off and you're not sure what you're going to say to these people who you contact, have that written out. Have those ideas for what you can say written on a post-it in front of you, and you'll soon find you don't need it, but it'll give you a bit of extra confidence at first. Of course, there'll be other contact types where you go on and have a chat for a long time. You find things in common where you know the person very well, so you just chat about anything. There'll be nets where there's a net controller perhaps, and they're calling people in turn after turn. So again, fall in with that pattern, do what the rest do. And when you're working contest contacts, the exchange is usually very precise and very specific. So listen to what it is and mimic it when you work them. When you give them a call, try and give the same information and give it in the same order, because a good contest operator is probably trying to log it very quickly and move on to the next one to get as many points as possible. So it's much easier if you can give him, if everybody can give that operator the information in the same order. So judging the type of QSO is another thing that perhaps you wouldn't think about, but it's worthwhile just learning about. Of course, there are awards. The DXCC is the DX Century Club for each 100 countries that you contact, different countries. Actually, entities rather than countries, because there are a lot of entities that where we break up what would be a United Nations country, if you like, sovereign country, into other entities. So the DXCC list is out there. Have a look at it, see what's on there, and start collecting. And the RSGB does a lot of other awards as well, as do various clubs. QRZ.com, if you haven't found that already, have a look. Put your information on there that you feel comfortable with. And so people can look up when they contact you, they can look your call sign up, find out a bit more about your station, or at least see roughly where you are. Beacons are really useful. So beacons are on various different bands, and they give you an idea of what the conditions are like primarily. So they're on published frequencies. You tune those frequencies, and if you can hear the beacon, you know what strength it is normally. I like using these particularly on VHF on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, so I can tell when the conditions are better than usual. And most radios these days have memories where you can memorize different frequencies. Now, a lot of people don't bother programming those memories with anything, but actually looking up the beacons once on the web and plumbing those into your radio memories is a really quick way sometimes, turning on the radio, flipping through the memory channels and seeing which beacons you hear louder than normal. That will give you a clue as to not only is the propagation better, but in what directions. Explore the DX cluster. That's a device online which will often tell you about where the most interesting stations are to work, or at least where some stations are to work. It'll give you the frequency, and as we'll talk about in a moment, if you hook that computer up to your radio, then you can tune the radio with one click without having to actually use the controls. And propagation to be aware of. Now, we haven't got time to go into that here. You could do a whole talk on some of these, but on 2 meters, the first time I heard whispering, I thought, oh, somebody's lost their voice. I'm listening to a contact between 2 people and they're like whispering to each other. But of course, now I realize it was an auroral contact. The aurora propagation was strong that day, that evening, I think it was. And the effect on SSB signals with aurora is to take away all the voicing of it. So you just get the breathing sounds, if you like. It sounds quite eerie sometimes. And similarly, CW sounds very odd. It's just a harsh change in the noise almost, rather than a tone. So, and you'll find other propagation to be aware of as well, particularly at the moment, this time of the year when we get foggy mornings, certainly very foggy here this morning. And sometimes you get temperature inversion, and on VHF, that can often mean enhanced conditions. So look out for the high pressure, slow moving, large high pressure zones on weather charts on the TV and on the web, and then be aware that that can make propagation on VHF and UHF much better. So lots to learn on that. And you'll get to know when to listen on different bands. So if you get a radio and you start listening to it, don't always listen to it at the same time each day on the same band, because if you only listen to 20 meters in the afternoon, you'll hear the same sort of stations from the same sort of places. But if you get up early in the morning and listen, you may well hear a whole different part of the world. So really good to practically try that out and see where you can hear. I think one of the things that foxes people when they first come to the hobby is you get used to call signs in this country because you get your own and you learn that and you say it so often, but you don't always realize that call signs in other countries can be very, very different formats. And that can be a bit off-putting sometimes when you're new, because you don't know, you're not sort of expecting to write it down like that. So here's just an example where K1AB, KA1B, KA1BC, K1ABC are all perfectly valid US call signs, and but very, very different formats, of course, and some of them are formats that we just don't have here, and of course numbers can appear in different places as well. So 9A1B and S51A, you've got numbers separated by letters or consecutive numbers. So don't be put off by call signs that don't sound quite right. It's just that they're from somewhere else, and that's their prefix. I think making the most of your own setup is important as well. I'll come back to this a little later, but what space you've got, what antennas you can put up, and how you can use the power that you've got. So if you're a foundation licensee, you can do a whole bucket of stuff with 10 watts. The power is really not the thing. The antennas and what you do with them is the main thing. But of course, people are limited by space and what room they've got. So perhaps we'll come back to that in a moment. Giving away points in contests. I mentioned it just now, but some people at first, they're not sure to get involved with contests or answer contest contacts when they hear them being made, because they don't know if they have to take part. Well, contests on the radio are usually of the form where most contacts are worth some points. It's not always the case, but in most cases, the station will love to work you to get some extra points. You don't have to enter for him to get those points, and you just give away points effectively by making contacts. So it means more contacts are made, and it's good for everybody. You get the chance to work with people who perhaps you wouldn't work otherwise, albeit briefly. And you might get some new countries that way, for example, in one of the big contests on one weekend. So look it up on the web. There's no problem to search these days for different sorts of things. Look up the contest calendars, find out which one it is, look up the rules. It'll tell you what information's needed, and you give as many points away as you can. I just wanted to mention special event stations. I showed you those brown call signs at the beginning on the first slide. And I just want to make the point again that not everybody comes into this hobby technically, but at special event stations, once we start putting these on again post-COVID, when your club does that, they need people, and they don't just need people to operate who are experienced in operating. They need people who have a way with people, who can communicate, who can explain to the visitors to that station what's going on, what amateur radio is, what's possible, what's not possible, what the people who are sitting down operating in front of them are actually doing, explaining what the maps that you might have up or the displays and things, what they are. So don't feel that you can't take part, even if you're really new and you're not so experienced. I think they're a great way to use some people skills, which you might have in abundance, even if you're new to radio. I mentioned this just now. I think connecting a computer to your radio these days is almost a no-brainer. Lots of software that you can get for radio relies on that, and it can enable so many different things like data modes or keeping track of who you've worked. And along with that, I would say electronic logging. So it could be on your tablet, could be on your smartphone, could be on your laptop or whatever. But if you're going to, there's all sorts of reasons for doing electronic logging rather than keeping a logbook manually. And so much of the information could be filled in from the radio to the computer without you having to type it in, for example. And you might not think now, but it's a bit late in a few years' time or in a decade's time to think, I wonder how many countries I've worked. And nobody told you it was worth keeping a note of that at the beginning. So if you're going to do electronic logging, which I thoroughly recommend, you don't have to log everything these days. When I started in radio, it was legal to keep a log of every single contact and transmission you made. It's not anymore, but I think it's still useful because it helps you work out whether you're getting better, whether you're working places you never worked before, and things like that. So, and for contests, you need to log things to get scored. So I think electronic logging, if you're going to do any logging at all, do it electronically. And to do that, you really want your computer and radio linked together. So there's a whole raft of stuff to learn about there. QSLing follows on from that, really, confirming the contacts. Some people won't want to confirm the contacts they've made. They'll be perfectly happy knowing I made that contact, so what, it doesn't matter. But it's quite nice to have confirmation of it, and that does enable some of the bigger awards to be applied for. So again, if you want to do that in the future, or you might want to, even if you don't want to do it now, log electronically. You can always come back retrospectively and count up how many you've got for that award. And finally, just on construction. So it's really hard to build a decent transceiver these days unless you're particularly skilled and have the knowledge and patience. But you can construct an awful lot, whether that be cables that you need to connect things in the shack or antennas particularly. I think antennas offer a lot of potential for not just constructing something, but actually learning about what you're doing as well, how well they work. So there's some practical things to try out about when you first come into the hobby. Should keep you going for a while. And while I'm on the subject of construction, what about the ideal shack? So let's say a little bit about that before we finish. My first two axioms for this really are, don't limit yourself unnecessarily, and then generalize rather than specialize as best you can. And of course, all this depends upon your situation, your location, and how many resources you can pile into this. But most people, when they start a new hobby, have got some resource they can put into it. And it's important, I think, to choose how you use those resources well. So I think of my dad when he took up golf. All right, he was a good sportsman. He tried lots of different sports. And when he retired, he thought, I'll take up golf because there's less running around. But he didn't go out and buy the best set of golf clubs that he could find, right? He bought a basic good set of golf clubs. And then over time, as he found out how good he was and that he needed a better putter and he needed a particular driver, for example, he bought a really good one of those. And now he enjoys his golf tremendously. Now, I think that's a good analogy because what you want to do is not limit yourself. You can go out and buy a cheap FM only handheld, for example, for 2 meters and 70 centimeters when you first get your license. And once you've used it a few times, you'll think, well, I can't do very much else with this. But think back to that single band multi-mode radio that I said I started with. Because it had more modes on it, I could explore lots of different things, lots of propagation, lots on the band, lots of different aspects of using that band. And nowadays, most of these generalist radios have all the bands, HF, VHF, and a load of modes as well. So you get everything in one box. And I think that's a good way to start, even if you're going to specialize later on, because it gives you the chance to find out what you like. And I think that's really important with so many things on offer. Think what antennas you can fit in for HF, for example, and ask people's opinion. Now, Steve did an excellent, Tonight at 8 in the past on this. And I agree with him that a single band antenna generally performs better than a multi-band compromise. So if you can fit in a 40-meter dipole with the center up nice and high, it doesn't have to be straight out, it can be in a V format, then I would do that. I'd try that first and I'd use it on 15 meters as well. So you've got 2 bands and you've got a resonant antenna. You shouldn't need to worry about extra antenna tuning units and things with something like that. So that's a saving. And if you can't fit that in because you've got a very small garden, then try a 20-meter dipole, which is shorter. It'll be open for most of the day at the moment, and you'll hear lots of different contacts from different places. And again, I would consider a 2 meter and 70 centimeter collinear white stick antenna just for the local club nets and things, so you can keep in touch locally with what's going on. So don't make things hard for yourself by just buying a cheap handheld FM transceiver. Those handhelds are great if you want to go out and help at fun runs and you know, do radio like that on the move. But for most people, it's rather too limiting, and you're better to wait until you can get something that will give you more options. And again, resonant dipoles should be more efficient than multiband G5RVs and other long wires or verticals where you can't put the radials out. All of these things will make your challenge harder just when you need to get it easier when you first start out. You can try all those other things afterwards. And just a tip, I think if you're investing in some equipment beyond radios, because people don't talk about this, they always say, which radio should I buy? I think it's worth thinking about other things as well. I'd advise a good quality linear power supply, not switch mode type. Ask if it's a proper linear power supply. 25 amps or better. Get that, run it in your shack. It'll power most things for years that you're going to buy or use. And if you can, invest in a comfortable headset, maybe with a boom microphone, but at least some decent headphones. Because if you're going to listen to noisy bands with things, you want it to be comfortable. If it's not comfortable, you won't enjoy it. And you're just making it hard and limiting yourself unnecessarily. And I think my last thing would be, don't skimp on low quality feeders or connectors. All right, you'll see lots of cheap coax and cheap, very thin stuff. Hopefully you don't need a huge run. So if you can buy the best you can buy, basically, because it won't let you down so quickly, and you'll do better in the long run. It's a bit of a false economy, I always think, to skimp on feeders and connectors. So your ideal shack and aerials and rig will be different to different people. All right. It depends on your situation, and it depends on your interests and aims, and your particular challenges. So let's just look at challenges for a minute. It might be just to maintain a regular weekly contact with your mate in the same town or in the same country, or to join local club nets. If that's your challenge, that's great. It might be to chase different countries, DXCC, islands, locator squares, other types of collections for your own satisfaction or awards. Again, great. But your challenge might be to go out trekking, portable, visit places with radio, climb hills, mountains. Maybe it's not easy to have a shack at home at all. So maybe portable operations the thing for you. Again, that might be your challenge. No challenge is worse or better than another one. I have an example from a friend of Kevin, who, again, loves to go out portable. He's activated so many islands now around the UK. And I've been with him to some of them, and it's great fun. Your challenge might be just to build stuff, right? You might really enjoy building your own antennas and other equipment. Maybe not to use much even, but just to experiment and check that it works and how it works. And again, my friend Barry does a lot of that. He doesn't make huge numbers of contacts on the radio, but to look at the equipment he's built, it looks so professional, and it's just amazing. It might be that your challenge is to use particular modes, be they voice, CW, data, or to use certain bands, maybe specialist ones like microwaves. Tim did a great Tonight at 8 talk, again in the archives, about the possibilities of just VHF alone, I think a while back, and that was really excellent. So have a look at that if you haven't already. It might be your challenge to use satellites or internet gateways to make contacts. Whatever it is, that's your challenge. And it might be participating in competitions, either to compare your own results each time, to contribute to club scores for teams, or because you want to win. You know, it depends how seriously you take it. So what's ideal for you with a shack will change with time as your interests change. Now, building my ideal shack, coming back to me again, 13 years ago, we moved to this rather rural location, which was the third place I'd done radio. And it's the first place. It took me 3 moves to find somewhere that's actually really very good for radio. So I'm lucky. I have height above sea level. I'm on a 50-meter contour line, so that's great for VHF and UHF. I have a clear path all around. I have lots of space for antennas, and I have a room dedicated to radio. So that's great. It's good to have a dedicated downstairs room, but of course not everybody will have that. And whereas early on I was happy to have one antenna, I was then later on happy to have one antenna for each band as I expanded what I could do. Nowadays, I'm looking to have multiple antennas for each band. So my plan is ever expanding. You can never have enough antennas. My radios have generally improved in performance over the years as well. I started out generalist. I started out shack in a box after that original one that I talked about. I went through the shack in the box phase, found out what I wanted to do, and then bought radios that were really good at doing those things. And I've got to the point now where I can win some of those contests and do very well. So I've improved what I can do on the radio side with that, and by adding more equipment. Now, satellites as well are still give me a buzz, right? I don't do a huge amount of satellite work now, but the thought of sending my signal off of something traveling at kilometers a second around the Earth that might only be so big, all right? The geostationary one I talked about earlier is a bit bigger, but some of the microsats are very, very small. To be able to bounce a signal off something that small, going that fast around the Earth and get a signal back again is just still lights up for me. And I love the idea of that. So I've still maintained the ability to do that with the radio equipment that I've bought. And generally you need one that can transmit and receive simultaneously. Not all radios, most radios don't do that, so-called full duplex. So again, if that's something that you want to get into, you need to think about the radio for doing that. And it's important to me for the social aspect. I like to open up the shack here when we don't have COVID restrictions for people to come and do contests and other days with me. And I'm currently teaching some people Morse code, or at least providing practice for them on a daily basis. And that's another way of putting something back into the hobby. I just want to say something about how you progress in this. And this 1, 2, and 3, you see I've labeled these bullets, and it's very important, I think, because the first thing you can do to improve things is to increase your knowledge, skills, and along with your aspirations for what you want to do in the hobby. The second thing is your location, which limits to some extent what you can do, and the antennas that you can use. It's only third that you should worry about the actual equipment, the radios and stuff. And a lot of people don't realize that when they come in. So it's, you can do far more by developing your knowledge and skills and trying different antennas than you can by changing a radio for something else. So always remember that. What's left for me to do? Well, plenty. I want to continue improving my contest results, getting more certificates and cups. I'd like to improve my knowledge and skills for using 2 radios at a time. It takes a bit to get the brain around it so that you can listen to one signal in one ear and one in the other and work 2 alternately, and never transmitting 2 at the same time, of course, but it's a skill that I'm trying to get better at. I'd like to build and install more antennas. You can never have enough antennas, so N antennas rather than however many I've got at the moment, where it's a bigger number, and especially receive antennas, because on the low bands it's very noisy these days, and often it's easier to hear stuff on separate receive antennas. So that's something else I plan to do. And equipment wise, well, I'm pretty happy with what I've got these days, but I would like to do more on remote, both being able to use my shack from somewhere else and also being able to use another shack from here. So I think that's an area that I'm keen to develop. But you see how much more of it is about knowledge, skills, and what I aspire to achieve than it is about the radio itself. And it's much more economic for me to experiment with antennas generally than it is to keep buying new radios. So, and I also like to make a communal shack really here as well. We've got a bit of space, so it'd be nice to get a shack where more club members can come and enjoy radio together in a social environment. So I hope I've given you a flavour of what's possible within this amazing hobby. You've entered the hobby, it's all there for you to try out. I hope I've given you the idea of how you can set challenges and try and meet them as you learn and develop skills. Remember, it's a journey to discover these things, not an arrival. And in conclusion, I would say I hope I've convinced you that what often looks like a solitary hobby, where you perhaps imagine this person sitting with headphones on their own in a shed down the bottom of the garden, is actually much more fun and easier to progress if you do it with others somehow. And I hope I've shown you that you can have fun trying different aspects of amateur radio before you focus on what parts of the hobby do it for you and what you like the most. And I hope lastly, I think I tried to explain that if you set your own challenges, what you want to do within this hobby, you can have an immense amount of fun getting there. So did I say fun? Having fun is important. Remember, it's a hobby. And that is the prime directive, as a good friend of mine always says. So this is a hobby, however seriously you take it. So I think I'll leave it there. I'm looking forward to any questions and also any comments. If you're not starting out and returning to the hobby, which was the target audience, maybe you've got some additional comments that reinforces what I've tried to do here. So I'll leave it there. Back to you, David.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. What a lot to look at. And as someone like yourself, been doing this quite a long time, it made me realise of all the things I still haven't done and could be thinking about. And I'm sure people at home as well are thinking that as well. I've had a few comments, no real questions so far. So if you'd like to ask a question of Jonathan and haven't already done so, please do it now on either the YouTube live chat or the BATC. And please don't forget as well, if you can, to enter your first name and your call sign if you've got one. So we'd love to hear from you. One of the things I was thinking, like you mentioned, a lot of people, of course, have recently come into the hobby since we're in these COVID times and people have been looking for a hobby to do from home. But probably like you with your club, same with my club here in Norfolk, you know, we haven't been able to provide that support and that practical hands-on that we would normally have done. So do you have any particular advice for them? Because I know, for example, the RSGB have had a wonderful initiative called Beyond Exams. And in fact, I think we can just show you the website that you can go to for that here if you're watching this at home. And it's a whole load of things there. There's a thing called Radcom Basics, which is a good way to get started. RSGB website section, particularly for new radio amateurs. There's some new foundation practical videos, which are pretty new. They've only been there for a month or so now. And they're really useful for getting people in. But any other tips, particularly for someone who's got their license, but they haven't done any practical experience at all, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, you actually stole my thunder with the Beyond Exams. I was going to mention that. I think it's a great scheme. Certainly at Colchester, we're trying to promote that. And I just think it's really important, as I said really at the beginning of the talk, that we try and connect people back to the clubs, because you know, a lot of the things that are on the Beyond Exams scheme are quite difficult to do if you're starting out and you don't know quite how to approach it or how to do it. There's quite a lot in there that you'd need some support for or some help with. So I just think getting in touch with the local club and saying, look, I've just got into this, what are you doing? And I know a lot of clubs are doing a lot of activities on air now since lockdown. Certainly we've increased the number of nets we run. There's a net most days now, I think, for people to talk to other people. And that in itself, I think, during lockdown is really important, because there's a lot of people sitting out there doing the hobby on their own. And it's not much fun if you can't go out and stuff, as we all know now. So we've increased the number of nets. We've started, like most clubs, doing some sort of video meetings over Skype and other features, other systems. We've just started the Morse thing back in lockdown. I think we had 13 people. We've still got about 10 people who are now getting on really well with that. They're making their first QSOs in Morse now, or making some contest Morse QSOs. And that's really rewarding, you know, to see that people have picked up and run with those extra activities that clubs are putting on during this time. So yes, I think Beyond Exams is an excellent guide to the sorts of things that you can do. And I think there's a dichotomy there between what clubs try to do to make stuff available within that scheme and what people want to do. So it does need a dialogue between people to actually communicate with your club. What would you like to do? And I'm sure they can find somebody in the local area or in the club itself who can help make that happen. So Yeah, I think that's a great scheme, David.
Yeah, that's good. We've had a comment now from Jeff ON8NT. How can we share knowledge and skills in a better way? How do we know who knows? He says.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? That I mean, I think we have a wonderful thing in this hobby that it's like I said about the fishing analogy, that you can almost talk to anybody in the hobby about it. You know, I mean, I use the example of Jim Bacon again with his propagation knowledge on sporadic E. You know, he does some great talks, and even if you don't get to go to one of those talks, you know, you do hear him on the air. You can talk to him about that, and that's true. And there's an immense amount of knowledge that's shared that we take for granted, that's just shared during contacts that we make. I probably learned most of what I've done by certainly talking to other people, and a lot of that on the air. And I've met some great people, and now I correspond with a lot of them, not just on the air. You know, we exchange chat and stuff on the internet, and I've learned a great deal from those people. I value those friendships a lot. So I think we take for granted sometimes that we need structures and things in place to allow the sharing of information. I think it works pretty well. Of course, there are lots of forums online. If you're into anything, particularly if you buy a particular radio and you're not sure about setting it up at first, you know, there's usually a groups.io or forum on that particular radio. Look it up, search it out, join up online, and you've got a free knowledge base there that you can find out about with that new radio. Probably everybody's been through the same hurdles as you're going to find. You know, how do you set it up to do X, Y, or Z? Has probably been done and documented in the forum. So you might not even need to ask the question. You can just search the archives for your keywords of your problem, and you'll see that somebody's already answered it. So I think there are structures like that where we've got resources, particularly online these days. There are some excellent websites. I'm thinking of Ian, GM3SEK's brilliant site on with some EMC filtering and stuff on it. Lots of other things. Chris, GM3WOJ about towers. So you know, I think we have this great resource nowadays where we can search for almost anything and find out information. So I'm not sure information sharing needs a huge shot in the arm. I think it can always be better. But there's so much information out there. It's just a case of looking for it.
Absolutely agree. As you know, I was quite involved with the RSGB online convention this year, so I maybe put a plug in for that, because all of those talks are now online on this very place. If you're watching this on YouTube, on the RSGB's YouTube channel, you're going to find both the introduction to and the learn more about streams. And as the name suggests, as the titles for the streams suggested, you've got stuff, real beginners starting there, some really inspirational talks, and then if you've been doing this some years and you want to look at something more advanced, including things like propagation, Jim Bacon I know gave a talk, and Steve Nichols, people like that you've mentioned, then you're going to find all those as well here on the YouTube channel of the RSGB, so do look up those, if I might suggest.
It was an excellent convention this year, even though it had to be online. I was very impressed with the range of talks, and even just to hear from Ellicraft about their journey of making some of the radios. I think that was really interesting.
Yes, it was nice. I mean, although I'm sure we all would love to a convention to be in person again and we can talk to each other and everything. It was quite nice in that you could see everything, because you can watch it afterwards, which you can't always do at the convention. But anyway, if you're watching this and you have just started in the hobby, there's a lot of, have a look at the introduction to stream, because there's really some lovely stories and some helpful tips there. We've got Eamon M7, so a newcomer to the hobby, CEC M7CC, asks antennas. Is planning permission essential at the start before even erecting any antenna? And even when we don't even know what antenna we want to erect, he asks.
I wouldn't go down unless you're planning to put something up that's extremely visible, and then you've got is much stand out compared to the rest of your property. Then I wouldn't worry about wire antennas like that. Most of them are quite inobtrusive. You can have a lot of fun with wires that are bent around the garden that are hardly visible. I've one of my best antennas at the moment is a loop antenna that is just propped up on trees around the perimeter of the garden, and you can't see it. You used to be able to when the sun glinted off it, but now it's been up a few years. it's really hard to see. Most people come into the property here and they say, "Oh, what's that antenna?" pointing to the mast, and I say, "Well, actually, it's this other antenna that you can talk around the world on," and they can't believe that it's just a piece of wire. So, people tend to. There's the old joke, of course, about if an antenna looks too big, then it's not high enough. But I think seriously, you need to take proper advice on planning permission. But I wouldn't go overboard with that. There's a lot you can do with antennas that doesn't need any planning permission at all, because it's not changing what your the outlook of your property, for example.
Yeah, and also, Eamon, if you're a member of the RSGB, they have a planning committee and a planning group which can give you lots of help and advice as well. You can find more details about that, of course, on the RSGB website as well. We've got lots of comments and thanks, by the way, to you. Lots of compliments and everything. Far too many to go through here. People watching all over the place from Sweden here, there. We've got Mickey B, whose call sign is M7VCB. So again, a newcomer, says, loves these chats, very useful. It's been difficult as a new M7 without going to clubs or the shops, but all this help online has been a godsend. My shack and QRZ logbook is coming along nicely, he says. So welcome to the hobby, Mickey.
Yeah, welcome to all of you who are new to this. It's great. And I hope there's a few listening that have come back to it after a while as well, because it's almost like a new hobby for some people now. If you come back after a long layout, it's almost unrecognizable for some of the reasons I gave you earlier. Yes,
I mean, all those things we're kind of taken for granted if you've been carried along, carrying on with it. But like the data mode you said, I mean, it's almost unthinkable now not to connect even a fairly basic computer to a radio.
Now, I remember when you had to have a sort of heavy teleprinter in the corner of the room to be able to do RTTY, yes. And it rattled the whole house if that got going. But now it can be one of the most unobtrusive modes that you can use for the rest of the household by doing data modes.
What can I ask you, put you on the spot, what is your favourite mode and favourite band stroke mode?
I've got to say CW. I just get so much satisfaction from doing something. Like I said, I've been able to talk, I can talk for England. I've got so much, talking is easy, right? I've been doing it since I was about 2.5, and quite fluently. But to do it in a mode like CW, where it's actually working the brain, it's keeping the brain going, to mental agility to do it at different speeds and in different languages. I even taught myself Russian alphabet in CW just to make it a bit harder. And it's really good. If you send a few Russian characters in Russian words to a Russian amateur in CW, they are so appreciative that somebody bothered to think, even if you can't carry on the whole thing.
We had someone actually send us some. Sorry, we had someone sent us the Japanese Morse code alphabet the other day, and that's quite fascinating, isn't it?
It is, yes. When you don't have the same character set at all. I mean, Russian's quite a good one to go for first, because it's like an extension of in Cyrillic of our alphabet plus some extras. But CW would be my favourite mode, and bands, I guess. If I'm not contesting, I guess 30 meters, because it's CW only, and it's an interesting band. It's sort of between 20 meters and 40, so the effects are interesting. I think when I'm contesting now, 80 meters, I've got such a nice setup with the room I've got here, that it works very well. So I can be very competitive on 80, and that opens up DX on the one hand at one time of the day, and local stuff the rest of the time.
Lovely. Well, Jonathan, I think we've explored the questions, and thank you ever so much indeed for sharing this with us tonight, giving us your wisdom, and also making us, even amateurs who have been doing this for a while, think about the things that they've still yet to try and experiment with. We're very grateful for you joining us. Thank you very much, Jonathan.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that ends tonight at 8. And thanks once again to our guest, Jonathan Mitchener, G0DVJ, for sharing us how you can get the most from our hobby. Now, we hope you've enjoyed this tonight at 8, and that you'll join us next time when we'll be finding out more about radio construction, why, what, and how you can try it for yourself. If you'd like more details of that and other webinars, or you'd like to send us comments or feedback, please visit www.rsgb.org/webinars. But that's it for now. Until next time, this is David, G7URP, signing off and clear. Bye-bye.